There's been numerous sermons on how Superman is like Jesus Christ because he has superpowers and he came from another planet to save humanity. But isn't there someone else that's supposed to look like Jesus Christ and fool the world? This video is proof that Superman is an Antichrist.
So dramatic. Hello everyone and welcome to That Christian Nerd channel. Today I will be reviewing a short video series produced by a Christian YouTube channel called Little Light Studios. They argue that the famous DC character Superman is actually an Antichrist. It's pretty wild stuff, but I wanted to do this video because I think it's important to kind of hammer away at what I see as the sort of satanic panic side of the Christian religion. If you don't know, the satanic panic was a trend that started sometime in, I believe it was the 80s, where I would say that Christians and some others acted in hostility and unneeded fear towards some things like Dungeons and Dragons, Pokemon, and yes, even Superman. So if you have ever heard of someone saying like Pokemon is satanic or Dungeons and Dragons is, bad for Christians to do or something like that, that's why. I don't want Christians to continue living with these like panicked and I think bad ideas. And I think that this actually does a lot more harm than good. So with that said, though, I am not doing this alone. I am joined by a Christian fantasy author whose favorite DC superhero is Superman. So let me go ahead and bring him on so he can introduce himself. All right, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Hi, Izzy. My name is Matt Starr. As you said, I write fantasy. I write sword and sorcery fantasy aimed at Christians, particularly Christian men, because we don't have a sword and sorcery. We don't have sword and sorcery books in our camp in the Christian world. And why does Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice Burroughs get to have all the fun when we can have awesome stories, awesome action, and even some good morals like Superman?
With that said, we can go ahead and start playing their first video. They made two videos, particularly arguing that Superman is a Antichrist. Before we get to that, I think this is really important to talk about. So the reason why this whole conversation is even brought up to begin with is because ever since 1978, movies, Superman the movie, 1978 Superman the movie, the cinema in particular has decided to create these parallels between Superman and Christ. So as opposed to being a kind of Moses, which is probably what the original Jewish creators of Superman pictured him to be, which makes a lot more sense given their context, he is reframed and repackaged as a more Christ-like figure, particularly in cinema. It started in a movie and it has continued in a movie, so much so that Zack Snyder, the director of Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, thought, wrongly, by the way, but thought that these Christ-like attributes were essential to the character Superman. And so that's why you see those sorts of things in those films. And you see biblical themes outside of this as well. One creator, YouTube channel that I watched pointed out that in Batman vs. Superman, every time death happens in a scene, there are horses that are around. And the reason is because in Revelation, one of the riders of a horse, the name of one of the riders is Death. And so it's creating that imagery. So he didn't just use Christ-like themes for Superman. He used biblical conceptualizations for his universe, the Zack Snyder universe. So that's why this is brought up, is because Christians have reacted with glee towards this. Man of Steel Man of Steel.
Some people haven't.
Yeah.
But I want to give a little more context. I want to give a little more context to the development of Superman's character as an entertainment icon. So yes, the 1978, 79 movie, it did give him a religious air, because Jor-El even explicitly tells him he's sending him down to be much like the same way that Russell Crowe, as Jor-El said to Superman, that he's going down to be a beacon of hope. But the real nucleus of Superman being more of a Christ-like figure came in the Doomsday event, where the DC writers essentially killed him and then brought him back to life. And over the course of that happening, there are other anti-Supermen who come and try to take on his mantle, fail, even resulting in one particularly evil Superman. But when Superman is resurrected, I mean, he's not really resurrected in universe kinds of things, but he comes back and he defeats that Uber Superman. We'll get to that too. That evil Superman, and takes his rightful place as the Earth's guardian and Superman.
Yep. Yeah. The death of Superman was definitely an important thing for that. So Christians have actually been reacting negatively to this conceptualization of Superman since that movie, the 1978 movie, came out. The director has told us in an interview, which I will link all my resources down in the description so you guys can go check it out. But there's an interview where he says he actually got death threats for this, which, by the way, is incredibly dumb and petty.
Gotta chill out.
Yeah,
I gotta chill out.
That is really petty.
Goodness.
Yeah,
he's a comic book character, guys. Let's keep it in context.
Yeah, it's really not that serious.
No.
But here's how I want to frame the argument. Well, I won't not framing their argument so much as framing what their argument should have been. So let me take you to a Bible passage real quick. So this is 1 John 4:2-4. It says, "By this we know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and now is in the world already. Little children, you are from God and have overcome them. For he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world." So there's a lot to talk about here, but essentially John, when he is using the term Antichrist, he is thinking that an Antichrist is someone who denies the idea that Jesus became incarnate. That is specifically what he is talking about, which makes sense. He's probably refuting, he's probably refuting a sort of proto-Gnostic movement, which
that's really interesting.
Right. So it de-emphasizes, and there are certain Greek philosophies as well that de-emphasize the body and do not like material things, but value the spiritual things. And of course you see something like Christian Gnosticism later, where like Jesus is pictured sitting in a tree laughing because people think that his body was crucified when he doesn't even have a body. So you guys can check out commentaries and those scholarly resources for that, but a lot of commentators have thought that he's refuting something like that, where people just don't seem to think the body matters that much. However, John is saying, no, Jesus did come into the flesh, and to deny so is to be against Christ. So in order to argue that a fictional character is a Antichrist, not the, but a Antichrist, you have to establish the idea that he has rejected the idea that Jesus came into flesh.
That is really interesting. I didn't know it was that specific of an idea, because when I think of Antichrist as somebody who is not a biblical scholar, I just think of somebody who either rejects everything that Christ taught or acts in his place and then becomes evil.
Yeah, so a lot of people have interpreted one of the figures in the book of Revelation who is going to perform counterfeit miracles and things like that as like the Antichrist, like the transgressor is coming. So a lot of people will say, yeah, there is the Antichrist and there is a Antichrist. So an Antichrist is someone who rejects Jesus in the flesh, but the Antichrist is the sort of end times figure that Paul and Revelation and possibly Daniel talk about. Now, I'm not super familiar with eschatology, so feel free to, if you guys are watching, feel free to go behind me, check my facts. I also know that people disagree about how to interpret Revelation, among many other things. So feel free to.
It's pretty contentious, yes.
Yeah. So feel free to talk about that in the comments and correct me. But that is how I'm understanding Antichrist, right? So you need to be able to establish that Superman did that. If he did, then okay, you have an argument. If he didn't, you don't have an argument.
No.
Okay. So I thought that bit of framing was really important because despite arguing that Superman is the Antichrist, one of the complete failures of these two videos is that they never define the term properly. They seem to just assume that people know what they're talking about. But that's not always going to be true. Or people will have misconceptions. And as such,
like my misconception.
Yeah. And as such, you have to use the scriptures to clarify them. So again, definitely feel free to look more into that. But that verse, I mean, regardless, is pretty explicit on what John thinks an Antichrist is. So I want you guys to keep that in your mind as we are reviewing these two videos.
There's been numerous sermons on how Superman is like Jesus Christ because he has superpowers and he came from another planet to save humanity. But isn't there someone else that's supposed to look like Jesus Christ and fool the world? This video is proof that Superman is an Antichrist.
So dramatic. Okay. Immediately, I do have to say something. So he is right here. There have been sermons about how Superman is like Jesus, and part of that was because of the marketing campaign for Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman, and then to some extent even Justice League. Like they explicitly was marketing towards Christians. They were banking on Christians noticing the parallels between Superman and Jesus in order to sell the movie Man of Steel. And you guys can read. You guys can read up about that, but they were actually handing stuff out to Christian pastors so that they could use the material for their sermons. So it's, yeah, it was, it was actual.
Did it work? Kind of worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Because at the church I went to at the time this was releasing, they didn't sign up for the subscription because they didn't get the package. I just went to Man of Steel, the midnight showing, because I love Superman.
That's fair. But yeah, so he is right. The Superman, especially in more recent years, has been marketed towards Christians. So
Jesus is crucified on a cross, naked and humiliated on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Clark Kent is crucified, almost naked, on a cross on the outskirts of Smallville.
Yeah, so
he's not naked. He's an Antichrist.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as we talked about, recent media has reinterpreted the character as a Christ-like figure ever since Richard Donner's 1978 Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve. We talked about the death threat and everything, and the original intent behind the original creators of Superman was probably to create a bigger parallel between someone like Moses and Samson than it was Jesus, given the fact that they are current day Jews and do not see Jesus as a Messiah figure.
Right, but even more than that, they were heavily influenced at the time by the classic pulps written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, such as John Carter of Mars and Tarzan, but even more so the Weird Tales magazine, which featured highly masculine, super heroic men who go out and they have superpowers because they land on a planet and they have powers on that planet, or their suits give them powers, and they go and they rescue the people on that planet from either the corrupt politician or the corporate overlord, or they rescue the damsel in distress. And that's the entire adventure. And that's what Superman is. He was ultimately a form of escapism for these two gentlemen who grew up in the Great Depression.
Yep, yep. Other articles and stuff I found also talked about how they use the character Superman as a way to express their desire to help people, particularly their own people who were oppressed and hurting and stuff from everything that happened in World War II and things like that. So Superman was used as that sort of outlet. I wish I was powerful enough to stop this and all these other sorts of things. So. Yeah. But again, he's been reimagined. And hey, that's fine. Media changes, things change. People can get reimagined, right? I'm not sure I would fully affirm authorial intent with respect to fiction.
Right.
You know, think you can do something different than a comic book or another fantasy book and it'd still be great. So.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
But unlike Jesus, Clark Kent doesn't die on the cross. The Jews were expecting a political savior and mocked Jesus on the cross, reasoning that if he were the hero they had been expecting, that he would use miracles, brute strength, or outside help to save himself. After all, how could he be their savior, their hero, if he was dead? But this is because they completely misunderstood what Jesus had come to do. He came to pay the penalty of sin, and that penalty wasn't a Roman cross. It was being separated from God. That's why Jesus said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The cross could not stop Jesus. Physical death could not stop him. Thus, Jesus had no interest in coming off the cross. It wouldn't accomplish anything. The knowledge that the anger of God was upon Jesus to pay the penalty of the wickedness of humanity was what killed him, not the cross.
So that's a interesting statement there. I don't know how much you or some random person who's watching this would know about like different Christian theories of the atonement or what happened and how Jesus' death accomplished anything and what it accomplished in those sorts of debates. But they did just express a particular view known as penal substitutionary atonement, where Jesus is seen as paying the penalty that we deserved in our place to atone for sin. It's usually seen as him taking on some sort of divine wrath or something like that that we would deserve. I hold to that theory as of now. It's not the only one I hold to, but people like Dr. William Lane Craig, Pastor Mike Winger on YouTube have defended that view, and I thought convincingly so. And I affirm that view. It's not the only one I hold. I also think that Christ, through his death, becomes a moral exemplar for us, which plays into my virtue ethical theory, a theory of morality, how we should go about our life. So that plays into it. I also believe that Christus Victor theory of atonement is true, right? Where Christ is victorious over death, hell, the grave, the devil, that sort of thing, is by his death and resurrection that he is victorious.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not how I've heard Christus Victor explained.
Well, that's what I mean.
Okay.
I just mean that he's victorious.
Right.
Yeah. I know that people have put Christus Victor as opposed to penal substitution, but I think that's kind of silly, personally. Yeah. So I hold to a bunch of different atonement theories just because I don't. By and large, they're not contradictory.
Okay.
There are different models and stuff like that, and once you get into the weeds, you'll see some of those distinctions. But yeah, so
we're here for Superman.
Right, yeah, no. So to create a contrast, though, right, it is by Christ's death and resurrection by which evil is conquered. And you can say a similar thing about Superman in the Death of Superman narrative. Again, obviously, there are contrasts and differences there. And I will make this point more explicit later. But go read Romans chapter 5. Like, go read when Jesus says, as the bronze serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Contrast between Christ and something else doesn't mean that you can't parallel the two.
Yeah, that's what we talked about last time with typology.
Yes, and I'll and so just look at Romans 5. Like, the entire point is that Adam is very different from Jesus, but typology is still made there. So any contrast that you can make between Christ and Superman actually elevates Christ rather than elevates Superman, which I don't think that this series understands.
Yeah, one of the many things that they don't understand.
But we will get into that.
Yeah.
In fact, they marveled to discover he died so soon. Crucifixion often took days. A moral savior, not a political hero.
It's finding that within himself, which I think will help him move on to being who we all know he's going to be.
We are confident you will become Earth's greatest savior.
But Clark Kent, in this twisted retelling of the crucifixion of Jesus, this Christ-like figure, doesn't die or even stay on the cross. This was the hero the Pharisees were looking for. A political hero, a temporal hero, a strong man to overthrow the powers that oppress us, and nothing more.
Okay. What?
What? It's a lot. Where do you even begin?
Yeah. No, okay. So this is a bit strange. The wording here implies that the Pharisees were looking for a savior more like Superman than they were Jesus. Now, it's been a really long time since I saw Saulville. It's been a really long time since I've seen Smallville, so I do not remember the particulars. But when was Superman in the show? Again, because he's showing images from the show. You're contrasting the crucifixion to Jesus here, that crucifixion that Superman suffers. When in the show is he ever painted as a political hero? Furthermore, Superman is not a temporal hero. Can Superman even die, like, of natural causes and of natural age? I
don't know about Smallville, but I mean, everybody knows Superman's weaknesses too. Well, I guess he has kryptonite because that's what's keeping him on that cross.
Right.
Yeah.
But if by temporal you mean will live a life and eventually die of age or something, that doesn't apply to Superman. So I don't know. He's not a temporal hero. And when, again, in Smallville, did Superman ever use his strength to overthrow the powers that oppress us? I don't know if he does in Smallville. And even if he did...
Here's let's steal him on the argument for a second. So maybe, and they'll kind of get to this in a later video, maybe they're saying that that oppression is going to be apocalypse when Darkseid is rocketing towards them, but that hasn't happened yet. And Lex Luthor is the one who took him down. And you're right that Superman has never been a character who assumes political strength to get to the ends that he needs, because that's kind of what his character is not supposed to be. He's supposed to transcend human institutions and transcend every human weakness, honestly. But particularly with institutions, it's the failure of those institutions that created the seed of creativity that inspired him to begin with. Because, like I said before, he was created during the Great Depression and in the context of the Jewish oppression in World War II Germany under the Nazi regime.
Exactly. And this gets into different areas. But let's not act like God doesn't care about oppression.
Right.
like,
that's fair. That's
It's not. You know what I mean? There is a whole...
That's not what I'm trying to say.
No, I'm not saying you're saying
Superman.
That. I know. But there is a whole bunch within the scriptures, in different theologies. Now, I'm not necessarily here supporting wholesale something like Black liberation theology, for example, but there are some ideas that you can draw from those things, from our rich Christian theological traditions and from the text itself, that God does not want people to be oppressed. He would prefer that people not be enslaved. And so
and it's actually really interesting because most of those verses call you, the individual, to do that. Like, take it upon yourself to visit the prisoner, to feed the widow and feed the orphan, which is exactly what Superman does.
Yeah, yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, he's someone who, you know, is fights for the lowly and, you know, those who are even beneath him, right? In a lot of different ways, and so I think Christ does that too, obviously in a different way, and God does that obviously in a different way. But again, as we talked about, contrast only amplifies the typology; it does not downgrade the typology.
Right.
Yeah, that whole thought is just really weird.
Yeah, it's very strange to want to say Superman is. Oh man, I'm going to steel man this again for a second, because I'm sure you're aware that during Superman's tenure as a radio hero, that's when he was attributed to his catchphrase of "Truth, Justice, and the American Dream."
Way. Yeah.
Do what?
No, truth, justice, and the American way.
Yeah. So he got that during his tenure as a radio show. He didn't have that before. So, in so much as he represents an American ideal of goodness and virtue, that doesn't mean that he's a political figure still, because those things exist differently.
Yeah.
Clark Kent's story then is a thinly veiled retelling of the story of Jesus,
You need to see a doctor.
including Superman going around doing good deeds, saving people. Even the show's theme song is called Save Me by Remy Zero.
Somebody save me.
Can I just say
Sounds pretty good.
Little Light Studios, thank you so much for hitting me with a wave of nostalgia. I have not heard that song since I was like 9 years old.
Man.
So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
That was actually pretty nice.
Yeah.
Early 2000s angsty punk rock.
Oh, I love early to mid 2000s rock. It just hits different.
Specific. Wow.
Yeah, like Skillet during that time, Flyleaf, Evanescence, all of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize how much of a time that was, like, in and of itself. Until I went back and listened to that, I'm like, man, we were anxious in the Nils.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
Yeah, but I just want, before we continue, you can't have it both ways, Little Light. Like, Superman is a political figure who ascends to power by taking the handles of the institutions, or that's what he's supposed to be, and then he decides, well, what he does in the show is help people on an individual level, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
All one has to do is go to google.com and search for Superman Jesus, or smallville.wiki.com and search for Jesus, and pages of parallels can be found, more than there is room to include in the scope.
Okay. I didn't notice this until just now, and now it's bothering me. Why did we capitalize ODS in gods? Why did we?
I didn't notice that either.
I didn't notice that either till just now, bro. What?
Wow.
I can't, man.
Somebody messed up.
You gotta mark.
I mean, in a completely different way. This has been a mess up, but there's another layer of mess up on the mess up.
Scope of this video. The first season of Smallville parallels content from the books Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, reimagining the birth and crucifixion of Jesus. And the final scene's climax is like Armageddon from the book of Revelation. Superman's subtle pagan influences, such as sun worship, are written into his storylines.
Okay. This is really starting to become one of my pet peeves. Okay, so is there pagan influence with Superman? Okay, is there subtle sun worship within Superman? Now they're going to talk about later the sort of Kryptonian religion, and yeah, fair enough. Okay?
Yeah, I was actually going to go there. Is Superman an atheist, or is he? I'm asking Little Light Studios, like, rhetorically, would you expect this person who believes in transcendent good to be an atheist? Like the very first belief that he has. Like his default would be atheism if he believes in truth, justice, and the American way, and he believes in those things as objective values.
Especially as created by Jewish believers.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So, but okay, this this really bugs me.
Okay.
So, there is a solar motif, let's say, with Superman and other religions. So you can see here, for example, right, the Egyptians had a sun deity, a creator god who brought himself and the rest of the pantheon into being at the beginning of time. And you can also check out this article here. There's obviously a solar motif elsewhere as well. But there is also this exact same thing in Scripture. So here it's not sun worship, but it quite explicitly says, "For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk, whose walk is blameless." So he's pictured, one of the depictions of God, the analogies for God, is a sun, who in the same way that the sun's rays gives us heat and warmth and all of these different things, so to God it gives us favor and honor and blessings. And obviously he's also paralleled as a shield, a strong tower, a female giving birth, a mother cub, all these different things. Okay, so we talked about that.
Actually, and I want to point something else out. So I read this book and one other one in preparation for this response, and I forgot that this is actually a series of essays. This is called Superman and Philosophy. It's a series of essays that is edited by the guy who compiled it, named Mark D. White. And in this book, in one of the essays, he actually argues the very thing that you're talking about, is that Superman's dependence on the sun is yet another metaphor, or I guess a typology of Christ, or even of Moses, because the sun, being transcendent and outside of us, of course, doesn't send Superman to live amongst us and show us the way, but Superman draws that energy from the sun and does those things. He shows us what the ideal human is, despite being not fully human himself.
Yeah, which is really
ignoring the heresies that my statement just implied.
Yeah. Here's another thing I'm tired of. I'm tired of Christians complaining that everything is pagan. And this is, I'll show you one of the best examples as to why this bothers me. So let's go to Acts chapter 17. Here, Paul is doing missionary work. He's doing great things. Well, here at Athens, now note the context here. He's at Athens, right? A very Greek place, even verse 18 says. Also, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers were conversing with him, and someone asking, "What does this foolish babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods." So Paul here is debating Greek philosophers, okay? Now, Paul knows his audience here, okay? And Paul, he's very clear from other passages, Paul is a Hellenistic Jew, meaning that he is a Jew influenced by Greek thought and Greek works. He quotes these things throughout his letters. For example, I mentioned in a previous video talking about psychology, refuting Andrew Womack on that. Paul says,
done a very good job.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Paul says, "Do not be foolish, for bad company corrupts good character." He's quoting a Greek poet there. And there's other things to note too. So here he is discussing with them, God and religion and such. Well, in verse 28, he says, "For in him we live and move about and exist," or live and move and have our being. As some of you poets have said, "For we too are his offspring." Now, notice, some of your own poets have said. He's quoting them. Well, what is he quoting? You guys, you're going to love this. So, this is what he is quoting. So,
there it is.
Yes. So,
in American English.
Yes, yes. So he talks about the quote, "For in him we live and move and have our being." So it comes from another Greek writer of the past, and he says, "They fashion a tomb for you, holy and high, Cretans, always liars, evil beasts, idle bellies. But you are not dead; you live and abide forever. For in you we live and move and have our being." He's about Zeus. He is saying this. This Greek writer is saying that it is in Zeus that we live and move and have our being. Paul that agrees with it, just takes out Zeus and puts in the Jewish God.
Oh,
right. Fun thing. Paul quotes this thing twice. So this phrase here, "Cretans, always liars, evil beasts, idle bellies," he quotes that in Titus. For he says, "It was one of them, their very own prophets, who said, 'Cretans are always liars, vicious brutes, lazy gluttons,'" in Titus 1:12. Secondly, "We too are his offspring." This is a quote from different Greek poets. Now I want you to really hear this. Okay, "All the streets and all the marketplaces of humanity are full of Zeus. Also full of him are the sea and the harbors, and everywhere we all have need of Zeus, for we are also his offspring." Paul agrees we are his offspring, but he takes out Zeus, puts in Yahweh.
Whoa.
And there are other places where, Paul says, it's in God that we live and move and exist, and these very sweeping statements, some of them even sounding pantheistic, not polytheistic, but pantheistic, in that God is in everything. And honestly, a pantheist and a Christian really just disagree about what it means to be in everything or everywhere. But again, Paul is very aware of these things. He cites them. Again, go back to Acts 17. He agrees. He explicitly says, okay, so since we are God's offspring, we should not think the deity is like gold or silver or stone. He is taking their very idea and saying, hey, look, I agree with this, but let me tell you the true God, not this unknown God you serve, or Zeus. So you see why I would be so frustrated that a Christian would be like, "Oh no, that's pagan. We can't do that." Where where Paul, in a speech evangelizing a group of people, quotes blasphemous texts to serve his rhetorical goals.
Right. And we're not going to get to this video, but when I watched the Superman videos, I also went ahead and watched the video on J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis because it was in the recommended. And I said, well, why not? I'm here. And it was interesting that they were faulting both J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis for using pagan and traditional and folklore in the crafting of their stories and universes. And particularly in J.R.R. Tolkien's case, that was kind of his point, because he was creating a new mythos for the English people. And he was saying what Paul did. He was saying that all these stories are just shadows of what really happened. And I'm telling you what really happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So this whole argument that something is pagan and therefore it's problematic really needs to be examined. But let's not even get into the Old Testament examples of the similarities between this situation going on with the conceptualization of Yahweh and Leviathan and Baal and Yam in the Baal cycle. The biblical authors are explicitly like paralleling these two figures and then making occasional differences in order to say, no, this is true. Yahweh's the one that rides the clouds, not Baal. Yahweh's the one that defeated the multi-headed chaotic sea monster, not Baal. We could go on and on and on. Let's not even talk about Genesis 1 and the whole thing going on with water in the Old Testament. So before we say, hey, that's pagan, therefore don't do anything with it, let's realize that we would not have the Bible the way we have it if it was not for these pagan concepts.
Mm.
At least our conceptualizations and the way that things are written in the text would be vastly different without these pagan concepts. So
yeah, I'll go ahead and give a plug here. They're basically lectures because they're 3 hours long, but there's a podcast called Lord of the Spirits, and it's an Eastern Orthodox podcast that goes into exactly what you're talking about, where they get in real deep, and it's pretty consumer friendly, especially for people like myself who was not familiar with those concepts before I started listening.
Gotcha. Yep, yeah, good stuff. Because honestly, this scene, like they show, looks epic. Like this just makes me want to watch the Superman movies. So.
Yes, Superman Returns. Yes.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, I did watch Superman Returns, and I saw like him like lift the kryptonite rock and everything. I was like, bro, let's go.
Whoa!
Oh yeah, it was epic.
Yes.
On Krypton, the world where Superman comes from, the sun is worshipped as the god Ra, not all that different from the sun god Ra of Egypt. In fact, in certain versions of the comic book, Superman is a Ra worshipper.
So, random, real quick, do you have any thoughts on like that whole thing of Kryptonian religion? I know that when I was looking online, I know some people was like, it's a religion, but like it's like representative of their scientific discoveries about their race, and so
that's a very classic pulp kind of thing to do, where you mesh mysticism, like genuine pagan mysticism, in with science, and like the machines run on things that you can't explain, and it's not given like a prestigious name like dark matter. It's given like a really goofy name, but it's the point I was going to make is like later, and it might be in this video where the Book of Ra will explicitly name Superman and then explicitly name Darkseid. And my point is, okay, so this proves that Ra is the one true religion of this universe. So Superman is right. And this gets back to what I said earlier about would Superman's default as a character who believes in transcendent values, would his default stance on theology be atheism? Like, just as a character psychoanalysis, like you already believe in these things that are outside of you, that are by necessity outside of material. You can't believe that material is the only thing that exists.
Yeah. And you know, to be fair to atheism,
I'm not saying that atheists can't believe in like transcendent values, but I'm saying that like if you start with I think his name is John Rawls, who has the thought experiment of the veil of ignorance. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't actually.
Okay, so I think it's John Rawls is this philosopher who constructed this thought experiment called the veil of ignorance. And essentially goes, if you're going to be reborn or come into existence at any given point in time, where would you be? Like, how would you judge where you want to be? And the point is that you would judge based upon the values and, well, in all honesty, the benefits to yourself. You wouldn't make that value judgment on like the word Christian or the word Buddhist. You would make that judgment upon what you feel is transcendent. And I think John Rawls himself might even be an atheist, if John Rawls is the guy who thought of this. But I could be misattributing that. In that case, John Rawls, I'm sorry, and the other philosopher, I'm sorry.
But
I remember the veil of ignorance, and I don't know. That's why this doesn't make any sense to me. Like, oh, Superman believes in Ra, and that's a bad thing. Yeah, like I said, he already believes in transcendent values.
Yeah, this is fiction. I don't. Yeah, like what else would you expect? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In Smallville, a special book appears named the Book of Ra, the Kryptonians' version of the Bible, which contains Ra's prophecy.
The Book of Ra. The Book of Ra.
I need the Book of Ra.
What do you want from me?
Everything you know about the Book of Ra.
It's the Kandorian Bible.
So I'd say the Book of Ra was some sort of Kryptonian Bible.
So much more than that. It wields great power.
The Book of Ra.
The scrolls of Ra have foretold of one who will rise from the ashes and start anew in paradise, where he will live as a god among men.
This is made to be a parallel to the Bible's book of Revelation, foretelling the way Christ shall return a second time to earth. But something happens. Somehow this book of Ra opens up a portal in the universe for the apocalypse to take place.
It's no surprise that Zah would lie. The Book of Ra is not a Bible.
As a note, it is a misunderstanding to think the word apocalypse means the end of the world. In fact, it doesn't mean that at all. That's just the meaning society has given it. The word apocalypse only means to reveal or to unveil.
The word apocalypse means revelation. That's all it means. Although it has come to mean end of the world.
So I don't know who that random bearded dude is. No disrespect to the epically
He
bearded
looks like
dude.
Alan Moore. I thought that was Alan Moore.
I would know. I was just like, I don't know if that's a biblical scholar or not. So I don't know why you're filming a random guy.
But he looked exactly like Alan Moore, the author of Watchmen.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope it's not Alan Moore, author of Watchmen, giving Little Light Studios theological advice.
I hope. Yeah,
that would be a hilarious turn of events, because Alan Moore actually subverted, he actively subverted the idea of God in Watchmen with Dr. Manhattan. But that's a completely different conversation. Yeah.
I gotcha. So, but yes, so yeah, the Greek word that we, from which the English word apocalypse arise, yes, does mean to unveil, to reveal. Biblical scholars have known this for a while. I feel like they could have easily played a video from a biblical scholar saying that rather than
Alan Moore. Oh my gosh.
But
I want that to be Alan Moore so badly right now. I want that to be Alan Moore. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's great.
That's just the irony upon ironies.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Smallville Apocalypse is not a book or something being revealed, but a fictional planet that is descending to Earth in a mockery of the second coming of Jesus.
According to the journals, the apocalypse is an actual planet and it's coming.
It is said in the book of Revelation that God's city, the New Jerusalem, known as heaven, will descend out of the heavens following a sequence of events. In Smallville, the planet Apocalypse is coming, ruled by an evil overlord named Darkseid. It is stated point blank in the final episode of this series that Darkseid is Lucifer and Satan, meaning that this is a reversal of the Bible, with Satan arriving for the second coming instead of Jesus.
Hades, Kali, even the word Lucifer is an old Latin phrase meaning morning star, bringer of light. I'm afraid the centuries and translations have twisted Darkseid's true gifts.
All right. So
That's it.
do you believe that Superman is the Antichrist, you filthy non-believer?
Well, I'm fully convinced. I'm completely convinced.
So much evidence.
I don't know why I didn't see the 666 on his forehead this whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a real quick point. Now obviously, like centuries of in the logic of internal to the show logic, a bunch of translation issues in other areas have veiled, Darkseid's coming and all of that sort of stuff. But this is so confused. So
confused is a generous way to say it.
Yeah. So a few things. Firstly, the term Lucifero is the Latin term for Lucifer, meaning like morning star, bringer light, or something like that. So she's right about that. This is not Satan's name. This
right.
is a trans. Yeah. So this was a.
I'm sorry, that should be obvious. That's why I'm.
No, I know, but I think this is just like
it's worth pointing out. Yeah.
Yeah, pop culture, even within Christianity, it's like, oh yeah, Lucifer. That's just one of the devil's names.
Yeah.
Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin, hence the Latin Vulgate, he used the Latin term Lucifero for Isaiah, for Isaiah 14. But the issue, though, is that this did not become like a name of Satan until developments in Christian tradition happened later. But Isaiah 14 probably has nothing to do with Satan to begin with. If you read the context, do a background study on the passage, it probably doesn't have anything to do with the devil. I'm more inclined to think Ezekiel 28 might, but that's also doubtful given what the passage is doing. So these are talking about human rulers, first and foremost, for example. So there's issues with seeing Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 as referring to Satan. So those are those two things. Another thing, Jesus is called the morning star in the Bible. So there's that. Furthermore, what she said is really important. Now, she's probably not in her right mind. Like they reveal in the second, like they reveal in the second part that, like, from someone who forgot the events here of the show, it looks like they're being manipulated or controlled by Darkseid, indoctrinated into this wild thing. And it looks like Darkseid, and it might be the case. Darkseid looks like he's sort of indoctrinating people into a counterfeit religion based on motifs on Christianity on planet Earth, as well as the Kryptonian religion. And he very well could be doing that. He's a smart guy. Religion is important to multiple races in the DC universe, so I'm sure, right? I wouldn't be surprised that he'd do that. But taking religious motifs and riffing on them in order to manipulate people into believing in you sounds like the Antichrist. So the parallel with that Superman is the Christ-like figure and Darkseid is the Antichrist figure. And any parallel.
Well, what they said was that Darkseid is another Antichrist.
Yeah, they say that in the second part, which is just confused. Like, if the analogy is to hold, this Superman is the Christ-like figure who will save us from the Antichrist and the bringer of the end. And the forces of evil and all of that stuff, which is a great parallel to Christ. Which is funny because like that means that the purpose of their videos is like accidentally defeated by their own.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? You want to showcase the dark side, the coming of Darkseid, and show Superman. Well, I haven't stopped it yet, but show Superman about to stop it.
Right.
Working to stop it, following the true religion of the universe of Smallville. That doesn't sound like the Antichrist.
Yes. So all of this is just so confused. So she's an unreliable narrator. If she's being manipulated by Darkseid, she's an unreliable narrator. She is indoctrinated and is pushing out of her mouth what Darkseid wants her to think and say. So whether or not the Bible's actually been translated and mistranslated in the Smallville universe is actually not known, because you cannot trust her to be telling the truth. But that's
if it is, we've already established that Rao is the true religion of the Smallville universe, which Superman follows.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, all of this is very confused on the part of Little Light Studios. Darkseid is the anti-Christ-like figure. So him riffing off the second coming of the human of the Christian religion of the human race makes sense, because the Antichrist is creating counterfeit miracles. So I would kind of expect him to do something like that.
Yeah.
So